that same line now means something totally different. And that's just Pulitzer Prize winning writing right there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. Here we are, it's 2025. That's Jacob, I'm Jackson. We're here talking about more plays, more conversations about theater's best scripts with all of you as we enter our new season, which I think is season 14.
Season 1-4, and I have a distinct memory of saying this exact thing at the beginning of last season, but I feel it so strongly again. This is such a privilege to be able to do. And part of that is because just of how many great plays we get to talk about. Last season, we started season 13, and if I've got the seasons mixed up, then whatever season we started with the 2023 Pulitzer Prize winner, which is the play English by Sanaz Tusi. Incredibly awesome play. I mean, that is A+ writing, I think. Just scene writing, character development, the way that language is used, which is built on decades of theater tradition about how language is used, but executed so brilliantly. Then this season, season 14, we're starting with the 2024, the most recent Pulitzer Prize winner, a play called Primary Trust by Eboni Booth, which I knew next to nothing about walking in. That's not always the case, but for me, Primary Trust was a total blank in my knowledge. Didn't know anything about it. And holy smokes, when I tell you that this play is awesome, this play is so good. I'm so delighted by the fact that it won the Pulitzer. It's so it's so unique from other Pulitzer Prize winning plays, especially more recently. And as I'm looking at those two, which I believe for us is season 13 and 14, the beginning of the seasons, English and Primary Trust, I was just glancing back through as I was preparing for this, the Pulitzer Prize winners recently. And they're a great list. Plays like we've done the vast majority of them. Fat Ham by James A. James, The Hot Wing King by Katori Hall, A Strange Loop by Michael R. Jackson, Fairview by Jackie Sibley's Drury, Cost of Living by Martina Mayock, Sweat, Hamilton, Between Riverside and Crazy, The Flick, Disgraced, Water by the Spoonful, Clybourne Park, Next to Normal, Ruined, August Osage County, Rabbit. I mean, that's a list of great plays. And this is kind of hot takey, but I do genuinely think this. These past two Pulitzer Prize winners, English and Primary Trust, are, I believe, the strongest two plays of that list. And that's a heck of a lot of high-level plays. I mean, plays that are everything in America. August Osage County, Rabbit Hole, plays, Sweat, right? I mean, plays that are huge figures in American drama. But these two, English and Primary Trust, it's not that they refresh my. I mean, I've always loved drama and scripts, but boy, those two right in sequence like that, winning the Pulitzer Prize. These are just two awesome plays, and it's just so great to have them get the attention that the Pulitzer Prize brings to them. I mean, as you'll learn when we do the context section, Primary Trust is being done everywhere now, and that is the kind of prominence that the Pulitzer Prize can catapult you to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you said at the beginning of that, I'm just delighted by this play winning the Pulitzer Prize. I think that's just such a good use for this particular play, because it is there is so much a beauty in this play. There's a lot of innovation in this play, but also it's just a very human story. A really kind of connecting to a character and the kind of journey of being in this town. And without kind of jumping into the conversation too early, just exciting that kind of a play gets the Pulitzer attention, both the Pulitzer nod, but also winning it, and being able to see it in all of its different iterations now that it's kind of out there in the world.
Yeah, it's it's a small play. And I mean that I think in its character number. There's only 4 actors, but that's become fairly normal. But it's its scope. It really, as you say, it really is just about one guy and a very small change that he goes through. And I want to be clear that I don't mean that to demean anything about it. I've been raving about it since we started talking. I'm actually, there's a great interview, and I can't remember if it was the interview with Brandon Jacob Jenkins or that Eboni Booth did, or a different one that I looked at. But Eboni Booth talked about how she became really engaged in reading novels, and it's either novels or short stories. I'm pulling this out of my head. I didn't write this part down. But she became really enthralled with reading these either novels or short stories where it was all about a small psychological change from the point of view of the protagonist. Really limited point of view in terms of its scope and really small changes. But in those small changes, you felt like there was massive shifts happening in like the world. And that's what this play does. I don't know like exactly how big the change, like in terms of world changingness, the protagonist in this play goes through is. But in the little transformation that takes place in the course of this play in his life, it feels massive in its emotional scope, in its like human soul deepness.
Yes, yeah, tiny, or not tiny, but small changes with large consequences. Is just kind of, we get to see what happens.
You could almost say the opposite and also agree with it. Like, it was a large change for Kenneth, but with very small consequences, like in the world,
in a global way. Yeah. As far as like the region is concerned,
right.
Most people would never know about it, but for Kenneth, large things change as a result of what happens in the play.
And that's really where point of view comes in, right? Like, this is not a point of view, like even a play like August Osage County, let's just pull one out of the hat, which is like about a whole family, and it is fairly limited in scope there, right? But even that is about like the way that different changes and choices occur across the course of the whole family. Like, the point of view of this play is way limited down to one human being. And it's specifically done that in like its theatricality, in the way that the play is cast and written and structured too, and we'll get into all that. But like, it's the way the theater experience is designed is to really shrink down your point of view, and that makes the change which occurs massive within that limited point of view, but small in consequence to the like other humans. But like, you don't really care, and we'll talk about exactly why, because all those humans are only like sort of real. And there's one that's more sort of real. Then there's others that are like, I think real, but only sort of.
Right. It's like, oh boy, I hope you're real.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot to talk about, obviously. Primary Trust is just so great. I hope that you all check it out there. Before we get there, we do want to thank everybody over on Patreon. Patreon is how No Script has worked for at least 13 of our 14 seasons or so, something like that. We have had a Patreon page where folks can log on and agree to a monthly amount to support the running of the show. That's why the show can happen. Without the financial support of those folks, we couldn't do No Script in this way. And as we've been raving about for the first 8 minutes of this episode, it's so great that we get to do it in this way because of conversations like the one we're about to have. So big thank you to you folks over there. There's a couple of different tiers that you can check out. Patreon.com/NoScriptPodcast. Lowest tier is just $1 a month. There's all kinds of different, rewards available for the different tiers. One of them is that at the beginning and end of every season, we want to say a personal thank you by name to the folks who are in the playwright tier. These are folks who contribute just a little bit more to the running of No Script financially. We do want to say, as always, though, that everybody who supports us on Patreon is a big deal in making the show work. But as part of our Patreon rewards, a special thank you to the folks who are on the playwright tier. That is Albert Dayan, Brennan Sauer, Brock Borick, Krista Dunn, Christopher Scott, Craig Elliott Frew, David Lindsay Aber, David Miller, Joanna Lawler, Jonathan Edge, Kyle and Lisa Tenhulsen, Liliana Hogan, Patricia Ralph, Robin Anderson, and Roger Hartley. Big thank you to those folks who have decided to join us at the playwright tier and are contributing to make No Script possible. The folks on Patreon make this show run in no uncertain terms. If that's not you yet, just check it out. Just think about it. Is the time that you spend with us worth, at the very minimum, $1 a month? I really believe it is, and I know a lot of folks out there think that too. They just haven't bothered to check it out. So head on over there, patreon.com/NoScriptPodcast, no hyphens, no underscores, and we will see you over there.
Thank you all so much for being patrons of the show. Y'all rocketh and make it possible. We'll see you at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast.
And now back to the script. Okay, so
Here we
for
go.
folks that are new to us in season 14, when we have a new playwright to the podcast, we like to begin our conversation with just a little overview of their life. And then for every episode, we provide a brief context for the play. This is things like when it came out, where it's been produced, some of its impacts, things that we can learn about the story of this play in the world. As we know, drama is not just something that's published and handed out to people. It has a life alive on its feet. And while this podcast focuses on the scripts, our context section is also our moment to acknowledge the live existence of the scripts in theater communities. So, Eboni Booth, new playwright to the podcast. Eboni is a writer and actor out of New York City. As with a lot of great playwrights, Eboni grew out of an actor. When I teach playwriting, I teach a text by Jeffrey Sweet, who's been a guest on the podcast. And in Jeffrey Sweet's book, he says that the best playwrights are either actors or journalists. And so those two folks, in the way that they observe and track human life, become great playwrights. And boy, Eboni Booth is a great playwright. Her other major play is called Paris. You may have heard of it. It's been very popular as well. But right now, Primary Trust is sweeping the nation because of how awesome it is, a testament to her writing. She studied at the University of Vermont. She's a graduate of the Juilliard Playwriting Fellowship, and she's a resident playwright at New Dramatists. She's also written for television for Hulu's We Were the Lucky Ones and HBO Max's Julia. As an actor, Eboni's appeared in productions at places like Playwright Horizons, Manhattan Theater Club, Ars Nova, the WP Theater, Page 73, Soho Rep, Club Thumb, and more of the places that we talk about fairly regularly on the podcast. She's won the Steinberg Playwright Grant in 2021, the Helen Murrell Award for Playwriting in 2021, the John Gassner Award for New American Plays, and that in particular was for her play Paris. This play, Primary Trust, I've been piecing together a little bit of the story of it. I'm pretty sure this is close to right, but if I have the details somewhat wrong, Eboni, you or your people can reach out to us and we'll record a retraction and a change with accurate details. I believe that this play was written as part, or at least started as part of her training at Juilliard. My understanding, this is from an interview, I believe it's the interview with Brandon Jacob Jenkins, is that she had to have a work ready to go for either a workshop or production or something, and didn't have it, and so she just started writing kind of the most very, very basic view of this play, really just about a guy who worked at a bank. At this point, there was no Bert, who I'll just reveal, I'll steal this from Jackson later on, is an imaginary friend character. It's important to the show. But at this point in the writing, there was no imaginary friend character. And so here's a quote from an interview. It says, then on the last page, I was like, oh, maybe someone's imaginary. I was like, what is that? And then Marcia Norman, who was a playwriting teacher at Juilliard and a great playwright herself and has a huge impact, much like Paula Vogel does, on what's happening in drama right now. Then Marcia Norman said, read Harvey. Now that's interesting. I would not have put those two plays together, even though once those plays are said side by side, that becomes immediately obvious.
Yeah,
I
sure.
immediately feel like a dunce for missing the connection there. Harvey has a very similar vibe, to this play in terms of its comedy, in terms of its kind of quirky reality. And of course, Harvey is the famous imaginary friend character in the stage. So then what Eboni Booth says about working with Marcia Norman on this idea of an imaginary friend. Another quote, what it taught me was, if there's an imaginary person, come out with that at the beginning. To go back to your point, the interviewer's point, what is this play really about? I didn't want it to be a trick like in The Sixth Sense, where it's like, oh, how did I miss that? In other words, the idea to on the second page of the play, reveal that Bert's an imaginary friend, as Jackson will describe, was part of, I think, sort of came out of her work with Marcia Norman. And part of the idea there is it doesn't want the play to be about the fact that Bert is an imaginary friend, which if it's revealed late in the play, suddenly it does start to become about that. The play was developed at the 2021 Ojai Playwrights Conference and at the Victory Gardens Theater. It premiered at it had off-Broadway premiered, which is a great place to start, good grief, in 2023 at the Laura Pels Theater. It was really produced by Roundabout Theater Company. There are so many great materials out there from the Roundabout production. And as I understand it, that premiere occurred very shortly, just a couple of weeks before the birth of Eboni Booth's son. And she talks about the relationship, I'm quoting now, the relationship between the two births of the production and my baby, and also the content of the play got me thinking about things in a different way. That production by Roundabout starred William Jackson Harper. He actually went on to win an Obie Award and Outer Critics Circle Award for that performance, which you might know him best from The Good Place. Has been in Ant-Man and the Wasp, was in Midsummer, that great psychological, crazy horror film set in Scandinavia. Since then, the play has been produced 2024 at the Signature Theater, 2024 Barrington Stage Company, 2024 La Jolla Playhouse, the Goodman, Seattle Rep in 2024, and now, looking forward, we are recording this in January 2025. If everything runs smoothly on the producing and releasing end, you'll be hearing this in January 2025. Here is where you can maybe catch this. This is, of course, not a comprehensive list, just what I was able to find. You can catch this play, and it's going to be a list, at the Everyman Theater in Baltimore in February and March of 2025. The Arts Club Theater in Vancouver at the same time. Theater Squared in Arkansas. Sorry, that one should have been first because it's a little earlier. January and February of 2025. My Arkansas friends, Theater Squared is doing this play, and it's awesome. You will all be receiving a message from me to attend. At Stage West in Dallas-Fort Worth in January, February. In Dallas Theater Center, I think those two productions are kind of co-produced and linked, but at Dallas Theater Center, February, March 2025. Theater Works in Hartford, Connecticut in April, May 2025. A co-production between the McCarter Theater Center and the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park in May 2025. The Alley Theater in Houston in May 2025. The Ensemble Theater in Sydney, Australia in summer 2025. And the list goes on. This play is everywhere right now. It was nominated for the Lucille Lortel Award for Outstanding New Play, nominated for several Drama Desk Awards, Drama League Awards, 4 different Outer Critics Circle Awards, and of course, it won the 2024 Pulitzer Prize for Drama. An ensemble of the judges, I guess, I don't think they call them judges, but the readers or the committee included Tracy Letts, another famous actor, playwright. It's a nice little sort of theatrical background or theatrical origin story connection there. That's a little bit about his life. It's very new, of course, because 2023 premiere, but it is already sweeping the nation, as I've said several times. Tim Tiemann of Daily Beast, when he was reviewing the New York production, the Roundabout production, called it, and I quote, pretty darn near to a perfect play. That is strong words.
Yeah, it is a real good, tight play. I'm excited to get the chance to talk about it today. We're going to give you just a little bit of a summary on this play, just so we can jump into the conversation together, and then we'll kind of jump into what we've already started in our kind of admiration and excitement for this play. This play takes place in Cranberry, New York, which is a medium-sized suburb of Rochester. So kind of a small-ish town, somewhere in the low thousands of people. I believe there's a line that's something about 15,000 or something like that. So low number of people in the town, but still, enough that there's stuff going on and you don't know absolutely everyone in the town. The time frame is sometime before smartphones, which I love as a definition of time. So you're kind of in somewhere prior to the advent of those phones. And the play kind of focuses on, I'm gonna give you I think 5 names to kind of focus on for our summary. The title, or the main character, is Kenneth, and I'll give you his character description. He is male, black, and in his late 30s. And Kenneth is a member of this town. He kind of has lived here for a long while. He moved here when he was a little, or his mom moved here before he was born, and he's lived here his whole life. He's an orphan. His mom died when he was very young. We learn all this kind of a big old exposition scene at the beginning of the play, where he kind of sets the stage for us. Gives us a lot of information about how he always goes to this particular bar, Wally's bar, where he gets Mai Tais, which are always on sale cocktail and they're the best Mai Tais in town. And he always goes there with his friend Bert. And right away, as Jacob said on page 2 or 3 of this script, he and Bert announce that Bert is imaginary. Bert's character description is a male, black, late 30s and 40s, and he's his imaginary friend, and they frequently go to this bar and drink quite a lot. The staff know them well there, and they frequently go there as kind of the end of the day happy hour. And though Kenneth is alone to the rest of the world, he is together with Bert in Wally's bar to kind of share time. He works at a place called, or at a bookshop, with his boss Sam, and that's Sam is the inciting or holds the inciting incident of the play, I would say, which is that he is finally retiring, and though Kenneth has worked there for years and years, he is finally without a job, and he got this job kind of straight out of the orphanage as a result of social services helping him out. And so this is the first time that he has to go out and find a job on his own. So that's the big drama of the play, is he's trying to find a new job to sustain himself with. So along the way, he meets Karina, who is a new waitress at Wally's, and she kind of starts to befriend him. And he meets Clay, who is the owner of the bank, Primary Trust, that he is kind of interviews for a job for. And all the while, Bert is helping him, kind of coaching him through, helping him kind of apply for these jobs, sometimes giving him answers for interviews, etc. And it turns out that Kenneth is a great banker, not just a great banker, but a great salesman. And he's able to kind of quickly move up the ranks of the salespeople at the bank. Clay brings him in and is like, hey, you're on track to beat our main seller. Just keep it up. You're doing great. And that kind of starts to build some confidence in Kenneth. He decides not to go to Wally's one night and instead runs into Karina, and they kind of go on just an outing together. They're pretty clear up front. Karina's pretty clear up front that she's seeing someone else, and as long as it's just friends that we're looking for, let's go out and hang out. And they have this scene where Kenneth kind of reveals some of where Bert came from. Not directly to Karina. He doesn't tell her in this scene that he has an imaginary friend that he sees all the time, but he does tell her about his friend Bert, and that Bert was the social worker who found him when his mom died, and kind of managed to bring him out of there, bring him to an orphanage. A pretty traumatic story of him finding his mom dead after school and kind of bringing her into the pantry and living there for 5 or 6 days, I think, before someone finds him. So pretty traumatic moment in his life, and he kind of clasps on to this social worker, Bert, who takes care of him to the orphanage, but ends up leaving him there, and then the imaginary friend shows up the next day of Bert, the same person. So the next day, Bert shows up at work and says, hey, I noticed you weren't at Wally's last night. That wound up being really great. I got to go out with my family, etc. His, again, imaginary friend family. But what ends that scene is that Bert decides that we're not going to meet again tonight. And what ends up happening is a bit of a derail from Kenneth. He freaks out a little bit at a customer, and he fears that he loses his job as a result of it. However, in a turn of events, Clay finds him and says, you haven't lost your job. In fact, you're on track to win this award. Everyone has bad days. Let's figure out a way to make this happen. We wrap up the play pretty quickly after that with some kind of noting of what happens. He goes to a banquet where he receives this award. He brings Karina, who brings Philip, her boyfriend, and they kind of support him as friends. He continues to learn more and more about his coworkers and become more integrated into that life. And he continues to mourn the fact that he never sees Bert again after that day. They never go out for another happy hour. And in the kind of last beats of the play, he recites how he was at this conference and wish that both Bert could be there, but also that his mom could have been there. And he perhaps sees a sight of her in sort of a vision at the end of the play. That's a very dry summary of what is a very imaginative play, and I'm excited to kind of move out of it into the actual discussion around it, because there's so much transition of place, of time, all of it governed by this little asterisk in the play. And I wonder if that's a fun point for us to start with, because there's this asterisk bounces us around often in the play, and the pre-notes of the play say that it's a bell, but that it's open to interpretation for the production to figure out what it is that moves us from beat to beat.
Yeah. Boy, there's just so much that happens in terms
things.
of how the play is staged to that contribute to a totally different understanding of the story even than like the straight plot reads. Yeah,
Right.
so one of them is throughout the play, after a line, in the middle of a line, in the middle of a scene, there appears this asterisk. And in the script notes, it just says asterisk indicates the passage of time. And then, as you discussed, there's an author's note at the beginning where Eboni Booth describes how they did it for the roundabout production, which is a bell like a diner bell, ding ding, that would move things forward. But also that you could do this in any way, through a shift of lighting, through a shift in character. Like, it doesn't have to. It just means that things are moving forward, or sometimes backwards, or sometimes like restarting a scene over again. We've talked about a couple of other plays with a similar kind of cut off, move forward convention. Sanctuary City by Martina Mayoke. And then, oh boy, I'm forgetting the title of the play, but we talked about it late last season. That was very similar to Sanctuary. Anyway, I'll come up with it in a minute here. But so it is this like, for example, here's how the play starts. Let me just read the first second of it. Kenneth walks on stage. This is not the actual stage directions. This is the lines. This is what happened. Stage direction, a moment, he thinks, and then the asterisk. This is, I'd like to tell you, asterisk. This is the story of how if you asked me 6 months ago if I was lonely, I would have said asterisk. So he cuts off and restarts several times there, indicated by the asterisks. It also moves us between scenes, like between locations, but it also like jumps us ahead in those locations. Like at one point, this is, I believe, after he's been told that the bookshop is going to be closing, and he ends up just in Wally's for days at a time. It'll be like the actor playing the waiter will be like, welcome to Wally's, asterisk, welcome to Wally's, asterisk, welcome to Wally's, asterisk, welcome to Wally's, asterisk, to indicate like, it's almost like a collage, or that's not the film term for it. I can't think of it right now, but it's like a bunch of days, right? Snapped together. And that's how it indicates that time is moving forward. So yeah, I mean, what do you make of that? What's got you peaked about it?
Yeah, well, I love that it's tied to the musician, at least in some of the show notes of the play. There's also a musician on stage who is kind of the musician of Wally's, and he's kind of oftentimes on this kind of Casio keyboard, kind of playing background music, etc. And their solution was to use, the first production solution was to use a bell to mark these asterisks, and it came from the music bay. Or not the music bay, he's on stage playing in Wally's bar. And so there is this kind of like really cool sort of I don't know, muse-ish being who is sort of moving us through time in that way, and it's the same character that's playing the music the whole time. And so I love that aspect of it. I also love from the position of Kenneth and the way his mind works. I think it's saying something, and sometimes it's a little ephemeral for me to try to grab onto exactly what it's saying. But like for instance, what you said just a second ago about how you like repeats, backs up, stops himself when the asterisk appears or when the bell strikes. There's this something about him that he's trying to work through things and to say things with precision. And I think that's a lot of Kenneth's journey in this play, is working through both new things, but also unpacking the old things as well that have brought him to this spot.
Yeah, it's almost like a convention of that limited point of view that we were talking about. It like somehow indicates that the world like swirls around this sort of singular vision through which we're seeing it. And that, so when things like that, welcome to Wally's over and over and over with the bell or the asterisk, whatever it is, in between it, tells you that like within the experience of this person, the days just pass without anything happening, without anything memorable or experiential happening. And that we see the memorable or experiential things. And also, like, things happen, like late in the play when Bert, the imaginary friend, comes into the bank to tell him to sort of break up with him, essentially, or tell him they're not going to go to Wally's every night. The bell will indicate when he's shifting back and forth between talking to a bank customer and talking to Bert. So somehow it, like, indicates the shifting of, like, the universe, too, between, like, the external universe where there are other people and the internal universe where he's having this conversation with Bert.
Yeah, no, that scene especially, like, I love the convention that begins to happen in that scene of like you get the sense that people are coming up and talking to him, but it's not important. And actually this play does such a I really like how much this play says that's not important and focuses you on what is immediately. And so like the certainly the scenes where everyone is in the bank, we often don't get all the dialogue of those scenes, but we do get all the dialogue between Kenneth and Bert, and it like focuses on us on the intent of that moment, even as we kind of hold the weirdness or the zaniness of like, how is he having this conversation with Bert while there's people in line for the
Right.
bank in front of him?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's cool in its or the absence of those lines make us sort of fill it in ourselves, which I love.
Yeah, and like sometimes it obviously skips us ahead in conversations in the way that drama is particularly good, I think, at demonstrating memory and like the way that we catch just specific moments of memory. So things like that happen, but then there are things that like I just can't explain, and that this, that because it's such a live experience type of thing, the way the actors make it function in their delivery and their interpretation of the lines matters so much. So I don't have any idea what's going on. So for example, during his interview, Clay is the boss of the bank. If you come if you come on board, we'll take you out for happy hour, asterisks. And then again, if you come on board, we'll take you out for happy hour and I'll bore you with stories from my glory days. So like I really actually don't have any sense at all of how the asterisk functions in that line. I think unless you worked on it in
Yeah.
rehearsal and in studio with the actor, you like, does that mean that the character stopped and restarted like Kenneth does a bunch? Is it somehow from Kenneth's point of view, him hearing that line with two
Right.
different subtexts, with two different tactics or intentions behind it? Does Kenneth need a second to stop because he's being invited to happy hour and like control his like excitement about escaping loneliness, or his anxiety about it? Like there's so many options there. I don't have any really truly any idea what
Right.
Ebony Booth is trying to communicate to the actor. So I think but there's so much left for discovery there, right? It's like that asterisk functions in a way to somehow interrupt and alter the interpretation of that line. And it's in the somehow that the rehearsal and the delivery of the actor functions.
Yeah, no, I like that the kind of focus on the somehow because it does redirect us because additionally the weirdness of knowing right up front that this is an imaginary friend, and also knowing that some of the other people know he has them. I think Sam is a really interesting character in that way. Sam kind of knows that Kenneth has this imaginary friend to the extent that he says, just don't talk to your friend while you are in your interviews. And so there is that little bit of interest in the fact that this character who is on stage all the first half of the play, at least in some of the stagings that I've seen, most of the scenes that Bert is not necessarily in, he's kind of sitting in the background, and so there is this kind of like uncanny valleyness of Bert that sort of like, and somehow it's all right that Kenneth is together, and I think, or somehow it's all right that the other characters know this about Kenneth, that the staff at Wally's is just like, you're fine, it's fine that you are kind of talking to yourself.
I mean, I don't know quite about that. Sam for sure is, or
Yeah.
at least pretends to be within the context of their conversations. But the people at Wally's do seem at least a little concerned that he's sitting and talking to himself. Apparently,
Yeah.
there are all kinds of rumors that swirl about him. When they cut him off at night, they sort of indicate to him that he should try to get some things together because he's sitting in a corner booth drinking all the time. The drinking in this play, I don't think it's maybe worth the time with a limited time podcast to talk about it. But Ebony Booth has had some really interesting conversations, because I don't know that when the play began, she really intended it as a play that had really anything to do with alcoholism. But of course, the fact that this guy goes and sits and drinks Mai Tais, he says every day of the week, like
Yeah.
Seems like something's there. And in later interviews, if you like track them chronologically, that starts to feature more in how she talks about the play. Really just sort of interesting feature of how a play on its feet starts to get its own thing. But setting that aside for a second, the other, I think I just need to shift because the asterisk is so fascinating we could talk about it forever. Let's
For
talk
sure.
about the casting of the play for a second, because there are a lot of characters in this play: waiters, customers at the bank, several different bosses, all those kinds of folks. However, there's only 4 actors, setting aside whether or not you decide to cast a musician. Those 4 actors are the actor who plays Kenneth all the time, every time, the actor who plays Bert all the time, every time, and 2 other actors who play everybody else, including the actor who plays Corinna later in the play, plays all of the different waiters at Wally's, and in fact introduces themselves at various times throughout the play as Miriam, Paul, Betty, Carla, all people who work at Wally's. At one point, she plays 2 different waiters at Wally's at the same time, having a conversation with each other. The boss at the bookstore plays the boss at the bank. And then in a really cool, like, sort of convergence moment, both of the bosses have this little saying, "Sky is blue, what are you going to do?" that they both say a couple of different times. What do you make of that as not just, I mean, of course, there's like a monetary reality in theater these days. Small cast things tend to get done more because they're cheaper to produce. But in this play especially, which is like loneliness, isolation, reality, non-reality, connection, all are so crucial to what the play is. What do you make of this like crazy double casting? Double, triple, quadruple, quintuple casting.
Yeah, for sure. Most of what I got from like an analysis sort of position is how it just made me wonder about Kenneth in this play. And as I kind of read it, it was like because slowly, like, just the fact that he has an imaginary friend alone kind of makes me wonder consistently, as like, how much of this is real. And I think, as we said at the beginning, you consistently be like, boy, I hope this is real. For Kenneth.
And to be fair, I my reading is that we're not supposed to walk away like worried that we saw things that were only happening in his imagination other than Bert. Like, I think that's part of calling Bert out at the beginning. Though I think you're totally right that introducing Bert in that way does at least beg the question.
Right, exactly. I think I agree with you that by the time the play ends, we believe that this happened to him.
Yes.
The double casting does, and especially double casting within archetypes, Sam and Clay being both the bosses, is an interesting thing to think about psychologically of what Kenneth is kind of viewing these characters as, and they both wind up being surprising protectors for him.
Yeah.
Sam is this, kind of predating the events of the play, has been a protector for him. He consistently gives him a raise. He is sure that he has a job and cares a lot that it's not just that the bookstore is closing as a result of financial straits, though certainly that could be part of it. Sam is like having heart problems and has to go live somewhere that he can function better and to afford the heart surgeries. So it's like he has a really heartfelt want to take care of Kenneth.
Gives and then also 3 months pay when they have to close the store, which is certainly unneeded.
Right.
I mean, it's very, very kind and generous.
Mm-hmm. And then Clay surprises us too, just to kind of wrap up that synergy, is Clay surprises us as well, where when Kenneth freaks out at a bank customer and because Bert leaves him in the store and then the next customer comes up and is particularly cantankerous, Kenneth just can't process the leaving of Bert in the moment and freaks out at this bank customer to the extent that Clay has to come out and like tell him to leave the room. And so Kenneth runs away, runs out of the bank.
And Kenneth doesn't come back for days, assuming that he's been fired.
Yep. And so Clay like enters Wally's and finds him and says, we kind of assume that the bad news is coming, perhaps, and that Clay has just kind of nicely found him to tell him himself. But it's not that. Clay flips it on its head and is like, you're still in. You gotta like pay your dues now a little bit. We can't put you on the floor right away, but we still got you. He has this whole like family vibe, and at first you're like, oh, gross, a family vibe in a bank. But he actually proves that it's true, that he's willing to go the extra mile to be a support.
It's like the good version of that.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that synergy between those two characters, double cast, is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And the Corinna actor playing both the waiters, like the service people at the restaurant, and then the customers that Kenneth is taking care of at the bank. That's a nice
Yeah.
sort of flip inverse of that example. But it's also a little strange, right? Because the setting aside Kenneth for a second, who's the sort of guiding thing for the everybody else is either an imaginary friend or real people who are all played in an imaginary way,
Yeah.
right? The imaginary friend is the only actor, again, Kenneth aside, is the only character who like gets a full actor to themselves. And so in some ways, all these different waiters and Corinna and the bank customers, right, all being played by the same actors, doesn't that in some way make the experience of them less real? And by contrast, then, when you have Bert as one actor all the time, a consistent character, a consistent journey, doesn't that make Bert feel more real? And kind of sort of
Yeah.
talks to that at the beginning, right? Bert is the realest person I know, he says. And so you sort of wonder, like, and this is just an imagination of why this might be, does casting all of these characters as two actors contribute to our understanding, empathy, whatever, for Kenneth, the way Kenneth sees the world? You know, a blur of faces, not like distinct people, but this sort of group of people who all have, you know, a particular relationship with him. And then a couple of stronger relationships are built with Clay and with Corinna, but that a lot of these other people just sort of, they're just faces, right? They're just faces in a crowd. The crowd at the end that he's where he's at the award ceremony. And so, in a play that like so much reality and non-reality matters, Ebony Booth has chosen to stage all of the real people in a very non-real way,
Yeah.
and the imaginary friend in a very like real, grounded, this is a human being, here he is, he has regular real things to say, he doesn't place a bunch of people, you know, he's just Bert, that's just him.
Yeah, yeah. I think I love that, highlighting that like the oneness of Bert makes him more real. I really like that. I think that leans into the loneliness facet of this play. And how like when you are lonely, especially in small town, because like there's the false the lie that like small town everyone knows each other. That's just super not the case always. And so like the kind of wall of faces that are around you becomes this sort of amorphous evolving, constantly revolving door of people. And so the realist person is the person that you can have that one-on-one conversation with, the imaginary friend, or the person who breaks through the sort of miasma of loneliness in the new person. So Corinna is a great example of that. He's gone to Wally's this whole time. Suddenly Corinna is hired on staff, takes the last available position there, and becomes this new person and breaks through the fog cloud of the loneliness. So it's
Yeah, though
interesting.
even Corinna like is still like other people too. You know, like
Right.
after
That's
he's
true.
gotten to know
Yeah.
Corinna really well, there's that sort of startling scene. It's the first time I think it's happened in the whole play where one actor plays two characters at the same time.
Yeah.
The actor has a
Yeah.
conversation with themselves as both waiters. Now, that
Yeah.
is admittedly in the middle of a real moment of psychological distress for Kenneth, and perhaps that is part of it. Like one of the things if I were interviewing Ebony Booth, that'd be what I'm interested in asking her. Like, is the multiple characters ascribed to one actor a way for us to get into the psychology of Kenneth, or is it more of a sort of meta theatrical commentary on the theme or on the nature of the stage, you know, something more in that zone, which does happen all the time.
Yeah. The other like big not imaginary character, but a character whose presence is felt is his mom.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
and kind of uniquely is not a character that's cast, is not a character that is around. I don't get the sense that like there's no direct stage direction call for something to evoke, whether through projections or lighting or tech.
Agreed. Yeah.
And yet there is a line. There's a line that's set up between in a conversation between Bert and Kenneth about her wearing this large red hat. Kenneth is lamenting the fact that if he were to ever get an award, he would have wanted his mom there to see it. And Bert is like, "Oh yeah, she would have loved that. She'd get her fancy red hat and show up. She'd love to be there for you. She'd love to see what you become." And that comes back around at the end of the play. And kind of the last sort of monologue of the play, Kenneth is talking about getting the award and lamenting the fact that he never saw Bert again. And he says, like, as he's standing on stage giving this speech in the dazzle of the lights hitting the stage, he could swear for a moment, sitting in the back row, there's this red, and it breaks again.
Yep.
Yep, the bell rings one more time. So the presence of his mother is felt throughout the play, though she is not a character on stage ever or a cast character.
Of course. And I mean, the way that Kenneth lost his mother and all the things that happened afterwards are, I mean, this isn't even like reading much into the play, are so much of why Kenneth is where he is. And I mean, Caitlin McIntyre, and I'm sorry that I forgot to write down which theater company she was the director. She's one of the directors, calls this a comedy about loneliness. And it's not like great observation. It's just clear in the text to me that loneliness stems from this really traumatic way that he lost his mother, and you know, the terrible, awful experience of the body in the pantry for 6 days.
Yeah.
And then Bert was the social worker that found him there. And then, so of course, there's going to be some psychological imprint there. And so in some ways, I think you could probably realistically read Bert as a sort of stand-in for his mother because of how closely tied the death and the advent of this imaginary friend who was the social worker that found him in the cupboard with his mother's body, you know, is there. He also talks about, in a very vague way, he says, after the orphanage, there were a few foster homes where ... asterisks. I think the implication being that some really terrible things happened to him there. I mean, this is a guy who's experienced a lot of trauma and pain in his life. He says as much very late in the play. And, you know, if you're looking for ways that the character grows, his admittance of this is probably one of them. He says, things would have turned out better if my mother had lived. There was a daily quiet happiness that I lost when I lost her. I mean, this is as much a play like about long-term, decades-long, like grief and trauma as, you know, as it is about anything else.
And I think another thing I love about it is a play that looks at how sort of support,
Yes.
and
Community, support, people around you.
Yeah, that becomes the antidote to
Yes.
that trauma. And not in the face necessarily of like diagnoses or therapy or anything like that. But that's not the focal point of this play. It's showing how these connection points in this community help him make a small step, right?
Yes.
The small step of new job. But as a result of that new job, bunches of dominoes fall, and big change happens as a result of these couple supportive conversations, these couple supportive moments from other characters around him, and it has big lasting change and helps him move not through completely, but in a forward manner in his dealing with that trauma.
Yeah. Again, Caitlin McIntyre, the director, talked about it, I think, really smartly. One of the reasons why this play is so resonant is that, you know, we're just on the backside of this global pandemic. So she describes, again, quoting, it touches on so many emotions that we recognize from a global pandemic: isolation, anxiety, and the coping mechanisms we develop just to get through the day. And that's really what a lot of the first part of this play is about the coping mechanisms that Kenneth has used to get through his life. I mean, this is a guy who at the beginning of the play has been doing the exact same thing every day for 20 years, is what he says, right? And so the inciting incident in this play, which is, you know, great. I probably will teach this play in playwriting class to the students. The inciting incident takes everything that has made him comfortable in his life and rips it away from him. That's just good old-fashioned drama writing, you know?
Yep.
And so now all those coping mechanisms are starting to fall apart. And Bert is the last one he holds on to. And then even that starts not to serve him in the same way. Not to get like, I'm not a psychological expert or anything, but as part of my work here at the University of Montana, I've been taking some like art therapy and counseling courses towards my research. And there's, a lot of the symptoms of long-term trauma are coping mechanisms, ways to make yourself safe that no longer serve you outside of the dangerous situation. And that's a little bit of what you see in this play. Coping mechanisms that no longer serve, that actually are more isolating and more damaging to Kenneth at this point in his life. And the way in which he is able to slowly make just that little change towards starting to come out of those coping mechanisms into a more community. He says throughout the play 3 or 4 times, I don't believe in God or hell or anything like that, but I do believe in friends. And at the beginning of the play, that's a little questionable because the friend that he's talking about is an imaginary friend.
Right.
But when he's able to say that at the end of the play, there's been a change. That same line now means something totally different. And that's just Pulitzer Prize-winning writing right there.
Yeah, what a great play. What a great play to kick off the season with. We've loved getting the chance to chat about Primary Trust with all of you, and we'd love to keep talking about it with you as well. Alas, it is the end of this particular podcast time to do so, but we'd love to continue the conversation with all of you out there in podcast land. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or other sites as well. I'm not committing to any at this point.
I think that's smart.
Yeah, for
things
sure.
Things have just changed a little bit with our relationship with some of those other sites.
It's true. But keep an eye out. Maybe we'll crop up somewhere else. But definitely find us on Facebook and Instagram at the username at @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep chatting about this play with you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, any of our other conversations from 13 full seasons now into a 14th, recommend us to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes conversations about drama, theater, themes, storytelling, characters, writing, any of that stuff, that like the podcast. They can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, any place you find your podcasts. Like us on Facebook, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish. We're on, folks. Season 14 is here. We're back next Monday with another great conversation about a great script. Till then, I'm Jacob, here with Jackson. Thanks for joining us for No Script, the podcast.